Right now, in a field in Arizona, a small animal is watching a person walk across the grass, and it is telling the others in a single high squeak that the intruder is tall, that it is thin, and that it is wearing a blue shirt. Not danger, not run, a description of one specific human, down to the color of his clothes. That animal is a prairie dog, and for 30 years, one scientist has been recording these squeaks, slowing them down, feeding them through computers, and slowly arguing something that sounds impossible. That this rodent, this thing most people picture as a glorified gopher, has the most information-rich call ever decoded in a wild animal. Maybe, and this is the word that started a fight that is still going, a language, with something like nouns, something like adjectives, a call in effect for you. Now here is the part the feel-good videos leave out. This is not the cute version where every chirp is a tiny heartfelt sentence. This is the peer-reviewed version with findings published in Animal Behavior and in Animal Cognition, and torn apart by linguists who think the whole thing is an enormous overclaim. I am going to show you exactly what the experiments found, what they did not find, and the one line the researcher himself refuses to cross. Because the honest answer is stranger than the hype. But to understand why a squeaking rodent could rattle the science of language, you first have to understand what these animals actually are, and why almost nobody was looking. Meet the prairie dog. Not a dog at all, a ground squirrel, about the size of a loaf of bread, living in the high open plains of the American West. The star of this story is the Gunnison's prairie dog from the Four Corners country, where Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah meet. They do not live in boroughs so much as cities. Biologists call their towns colonies, divided into wards, divided again into family groups called coteries, each with its own tunnels, its own entrances, its own neighbors. A single town, a century ago, could stretch for miles and hold millions, and they are not just charming. They are a keystone. Their digging turns and waters the soil. Their tunnels shelter burrowing owls, snakes, rabbits, beetles, and the gravelly endangered black-footed ferret that eats almost nothing else. Pull the prairie dogs out, and the whole grassland starts to unravel, which makes the next number hard to read. We have gone from around 24 million acres of prairie dog towns to under 500,000, a decline of roughly 98%. And here is the quiet tragedy underneath this entire video. We may be learning to decode their voices at the exact moment we are erasing them. Because for most of the last century, nobody thought there was a voice to decode. An alarm call was treated as a reflex, fear made audible. The animal sees a shadow, panic fires, a squeak comes out, everybody dives underground. The squeak meant, at most, predator run. The reigning dogma in animal behavior was blunt. Animal calls are emotional, not referential. They leak how an animal feels. They do not refer to things in the world the way our words do. To suggest a rodent's chirp could specifically mean hawk, as opposed to coyote, was already a stretch. To suggest it could mean tall human in a blue shirt was, frankly, a good way to end a career, which is exactly what one man decided to test. His name is Kon Slobochikov, a biologist at Northern Arizona University. And starting in the 1980s, he did the unglamorous thing. He sat in the cold, year after year, with a microphone and a parabolic dish, recording thousands of alarm calls and writing down precisely what set each one off. Not guessing, measuring, he decided to treat the prairie dog not like a cartoon, but like a code. And the first result, published in 1991 in the journal Animal Behavior, was already a crack call. When he took the calls for a red-tailed hawk, a coyote, a domestic dog, and a human, and ran them through statistical analysis. They were not interchangeable squeaks. They were acoustically distinct, a different call for each kind of threat, and the prairie dogs responded differently to each, depending on what that predator does. A hawk call, and they crash straight down their holes, because a hawk strikes from above. A coyote call, and they stand at their burrow rims and watch, because a coyote has to be tracked across the ground. The call was not just shouting danger, it was naming the danger, and the listeners acted on the noun. That alone would be a strong paper. But Slobochikov kept pushing, and this is where it gets uncomfortable for the skeptics. and uncomfortable for the believers too, because he started asking whether the calls described the individual intruder, not just hawk, but how big, what shape, and what color. Which brings us to the experiment this whole field argues about. 3 women, similar in size, walked one at a time through a prairie dog colony. Same path, same pace. The only thing that changed was the color of their shirts: blue, yellow, green. He recorded the calls and ran them through the analysis. Now here is where I need you to trust this channel instead of the clickbait. Because the headline you have probably seen is they have a word for every color. That is not what happened. What happened is more interesting and more honest. The calls for the blue shirt and the yellow shirt were significantly different, but the calls for green were not reliably different from yellow. And here is the beautiful part. That is not a failure. That is the fingerprint of something real. Because prairie dogs, like many mammals, do not see green and yellow as cleanly separate the way we do. The calls drew exactly the color line their eyes can actually draw. If they were faking, if this were noise, you would not expect the mistakes to line up perfectly with their own vision. The imperfection is the proof. Then he went further, into territory that still divides the room. He suspended simple shapes, a circle, a square, a triangle, on a wire, and pulled them across the colony, objects no prairie dog had ever seen, that no alarm call could already exist for. And the calls for the different shapes came out different too. To Slobochikov, this was the big one. It suggested productivity, the ability to coin a brand new label for a brand new thing, which is one of the features linguists reserve for real language. He laid all of this out in a Harvard University press book in 2009, and later in a popular book with a title that tells you exactly how far he is willing to go, Chasing Dr. Dolittle. And in interviews he goes all the way. He has called it the most sophisticated animal language decoded so far, ahead of chimps, ahead of dolphins. He even claims the calls can flag whether a human is carrying a gun, which is the moment I have to stop and put my honest skeptic hat on, because that is exactly the kind of claim that has gotten this work in trouble. So let me be precise about what is solid and what is not. Because the critics here are not cranks, they are serious, and they have a point. The deepest objection comes from researchers like Drew Rendell and Michael Oren, who argue that the whole idea of an animal call carrying information like a word carries meaning is the wrong way to think about it. In their view, a signal does not transmit a label. It influences a listener's behavior. The call might reliably go up for a hawk without the prairie dog meaning hawk the way you mean it. Useful, referential, even astonishing, but not necessarily language. Then there are the linguists, like Pauline Foster, who go after the specifics. She points out that referring to a hawk you can plainly see is not the same as what we do with words, where I can say the word cat with no cat anywhere in sight, and even talk about a cat that visited yesterday. That is called displacement, and prairie dogs have not shown it. She argues you cannot find word units just by chopping a recording into slices. And on those novel shapes, she offers a quieter, more deflating explanation. Maybe the prairie dogs were not inventing a word for triangle. Maybe a strange object on a wire just scared them by a different amount. And the most stubborn line of all comes from the center of linguistics itself, from the famous paper by Mark Hauser, Noam Chomsky, and Tecumseh Fitch, which argues that the one truly human thing is recursion, the ability to nest ideas inside ideas, a clause inside a clause, forever. No prairie dog has ever shown a flicker of that. There is also a test Slobochikov has never published, the obvious one. Hand a stranger nothing but the computer's reading of a call and have them correctly recover the shirt color. Until that exists, the door stays open. Here is the thing, though. Slobochikov himself, the man accused of overclaiming, draws a careful line. He does not say a prairie dog speaks English. His actual claim is subtler and harder to dismiss. He says the difference between their communication and ours is one of degree, not of essence. Not a different thing, a smaller amount of the same thing. And when you strip away both the hype and the eye-rolling, what is left is genuinely staggering. A prairie dog is not narrating a sentence, but the best evidence we have says its alarm call is not a single fixed scream. It is a bundle, a category, the kind of predator, wrapped together with modifiers, the size, the shape, and a color that both your eye and its eye can see, which means that when you walk across that field, the call that rises up is, in a real and measurable sense, about you. A tiny sound portrait, your height, your shape, the blue of your shirt, handed from animal to animal across the whole town, faster than you can cross it. They saw you coming, and in their own way, they described you to each other. And this is the part that should stop you. Because it keeps happening. We said tools were the human thing, and then we watched crows bend wire into hooks. We said culture was ours, and then we found whales carrying songs between oceans. We said grammar was the last wall, and then a sparrow-sized bird in Japan proved that changing the order of its calls changes their meaning. And now a rodent that most people would step over without a second look appears to do the one thing we were most certain belonged to us alone: to look at an individual and describe it. Maybe language was never a wall, with humans on one side and the silent animals on the other. Maybe it is a slope, and we are simply the creature that climbed the highest, standing near the top, slowly turning around and realizing for the first time that the whole hillside below us has been talking the entire time. If this changed the way you hear the animals around you, then subscribe, because that is exactly what this channel is for, every single week. The peer-reviewed version, not the feel-good one. Next time, the researchers who recorded wild elephants for years and found the thing we were most sure no other animal had, that elephants call each other by name, real names, for specific individuals. You will not want to miss it. See you in the next one.